This is the second of 3 videos in which I do some housekeeping on my currently reading list by moving 3 books from my currently reading list to my abandoned list, the books I'm not actually currently reading, or in booktube parlance, DNF. Here are 3 books I am DNFing. So I already talked about this one in the previous video, and I'll leave a link to that in the description down below if you missed it. But today I'm going to DNF, do not finish the grammar book. Now, as I said with the other book, the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language, I do reserve the right to come back to this someday. And there is a part of me that would still like to finish this book off, would like to come back to it someday maybe. But for the present time, I think it's time to admit to myself that I am not currently reading this. I abandoned it a long time ago. And as we say here in the 21st century, I just don't have the bandwidth to read a book like this at the moment. Very busy with work and kids and everything, and just don't have the time or mental capacity at the moment to engage with this book. All right, so let me start off by, I guess, maybe talking about my history with this book. I picked this book up I'm going to go over to my blog here. You can see here in 2020. And at the time I picked it up, I was actually hoping it would be a useful supplement to a Chomsky book I was reading, or a book about Chomsky, An Introduction to Chomsky's Universal Grammar, which is a book that the more I read it, the more progressively lost I became. And I had this idea that maybe it would be useful to pick up a good grammar book to read alongside the Chomsky grammar book, just so maybe I could start making sense of all this grammar terminology. It was a terrible idea, and in the back of my head I knew it was a terrible idea, but I did it anyways, just because I love starting new books. I'm very bad at finishing books, but I love starting books. I always imagine all the things I'm going to learn from a new book and how much fun it's going to be to read this book and what a great reading experience it's going to be. I'm very good at starting books and very terrible at the follow-through. So in the back of my head, I think I knew all along exactly what I was doing. I was starting another book, when what I should have been doing is just concentrating on finishing that Chomsky book first, which is eventually what I ended up doing a year later, after kind of shelving both books temporarily and then knocking off the Chomsky book. And then coming back to this grammar book later. Now, the first time I tried to read it, I did get about 200 pages into it before I temporarily shelved it. And I had a bookmark just like this one. Actually, I think it was exactly this one, about the 200-page mark. And one day when I was at work, my daughter pulled the bookmark out. And I came back home and I was just appalled. And I said to my wife, "How could you let her pull the bookmark out? I don't remember what page I was on anymore. It's been like a year since I touched that book. I was at 200 and something, but..." And my wife said, "I can't watch her all the time. You know, she's getting into everything," which she does. So fair enough. And also I decided that, you know what, if I can't even remember where I left off, maybe it's just time to start again from the beginning. So I started again from the beginning, and this time I got all the way up to, it looks like, page 318 and 319. And I don't remember when the last time I picked up this book was. It will be in my weekly reading vlog, so I'll double check that after I finish this video. But I think it's been a year, 2 years since I looked at this. Now, the book itself is good. Actually, sorry, let me back up a moment. When I started this book back in 2020, I actually was by then in the habit of doing started videos for books I was starting. And this is 793 views, 21 likes. That's actually one of my most popular videos of all time on this channel. 793 views is a lot of views for this channel. This is a small booktube channel that typically gets between 5 and 20 views per video. So it does, and they're not watching it because of me. They're watching it because these are people who have found this title by searching for this book and these authors, and then stumbled across my video. So there's obviously a lot of interest in this book, and it kind of half makes me wonder if I'm letting the viewers down by not finishing it and not reviewing it, right? Maybe what the people want is a thorough review of this book, given how much interest there is just in that started video. But realistically, what would I say about it? I mean, I even if I read the whole thing and I gave a review of it, I know my reviews on this channel tend to be long-winded and I tend to talk a lot. But even if I talked for an hour about this book, I wouldn't be able to give an in-depth, thorough review of all the grammar points that are in here. So I'll just, sorry to disappoint anyone who was hoping for that, give some maybe generalities about the reading experience with this book. Maybe the first thing to note is that this is no longer even the latest edition. This is the second edition. I believe the most current edition now is the third edition. School I'm working at now actually has the third edition on its shelves, so I've seen it. But this book was pulled from the library of my previous school. It was in my backpack for a long time, on and off, commuting to and from work. And unfortunately, on one of those days, I got caught in a downpour on rainy season and could not get a taxi. Was walking half the way home, and the book has been a little bit water damaged ever since. I don't know how well you can see that on this video. Some of these pages here are still a little bit stuck together, but they do. Yeah, the bottom half of the book is more waterlogged than the top. Because the rainwater was accumulating in the bottom of my backpack as I got drenched trying to walk home. And I had an umbrella and a raincoat and everything, but it was just when it downpours here in Vietnam, it really downpours. Yeah, here you can see they're still a little bit stuck together, just like that. But the book was not damaged beyond salvageability by any means. I was still able to read the words. So there is a lot of interesting information here about grammar. And in fact, even before I attempted to read this book cover to cover, I had been using it as a resource when I did the Delta. So if those of you who have done the Delta may be familiar, you need to do like a little mini research paper on your language points before teaching the lesson. So I use this to research the present perfect, or the perfect aspect, and found in here some interesting things that I didn't find in other language books about the present perfect. For example, where is it? Oh yeah, I think it's over here, yeah. This is something that I didn't find in any other books, which I thought was really interesting. They draw on research. This book draws on a lot of research here. That quite often the present perfect is used to introduce a past topic, and then it switches to either a past tense or a habitual past uniform. Habitual present tense, or I think the past tense as well. So, yeah, here's a perfect example. I've been bit once already by a German Shepherd. So we use the present perfect to introduce the topic, and then the rest of the narrative is in the past simple. So the idea that the present perfect forms this little bridging function. It introduces the topic in the past, and then the rest of it can proceed in the past simple as normal. I thought that was interesting. It's something that stuck with me. It's something I think I've used in a few lessons. I've used when talking with other English teachers. So there are little bits and bobs from this book that have stuck with me. But yeah, there's a whole bunch that has not stuck with me. Actually, maybe I should back up again. Sorry, that's the danger of doing these things unscripted. One of the reasons I wanted to read this book, and one of the reasons I came back to it even when I was done with the Chomsky grammar book, and maybe one of the reasons I was reading the Chomsky grammar book in the first place, is after coming up on 25 years teaching English as a second language, I've become a little bit self-conscious, embarrassed, maybe depressed about how little grammar knowledge I've accumulated during that time. And I've accumulated all the usual grammar knowledge that most ESL teachers have. I know the way the present perfect is traditionally taught in textbooks. I know the difference between the going to future and the will future and all that kind of stuff, but all surface level stuff. And I thought, after all these years in the industry, wouldn't it be appropriate if I knew the grammar backwards and forwards? The way that my old school teachers, back when I was in middle school and high school, you remember those old school English teachers we used to have back in our day, who would just know everything about grammar inside and out, or at least so it seemed to me at the time, to have that kind of knowledge. And it's something I've been wishing for a long time. But the problem is, like I said when I was saying goodbye to the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language, it's one thing to read it, but I just cannot get it into my long-term memory. And that's one thing I really noticed when I picked this book up again after setting it aside. So like I said, the first time I got about 200 pages into it, I set it aside, then I picked it up later, and I was reading through these sections that I already read through, the first 200 pages, and they were all vaguely familiar, but I began to realize that I had forgotten everything in here. As I was reading it, some of it was like being like, okay, yeah, I do vaguely remember reading it, but none of it was an active recall. Here's an example, right? It's talking about the copula and subject-verb agreement. And it goes through rules for persistently troublesome cases. Sorry, the focus on this camera is not cooperating with me. The rules for persistently troublesome cases. And it goes through about, how many? 10, 11 consistently troublesome cases. For example, here's a case here, number 5. Camera is not focusing, is it? So usually the camera focuses better on the text. There we go. Okay. So a number of normally takes the plural, while the number of normally takes the singular. So a number of students have dropped that course. The number of students in this school is 2,000. So is used with the singular subject, have used with the plural subject here. Has would be the singular verb in this case. So this is something that I had read 2 times before, and I guess now revisiting it for the purpose of this video, this is my 3rd time coming back to it. And I mean, sure enough, it makes sense when I read it, as with, the fractions and percentages take a singular verb inflection when modifying a non-count noun, and a plural verb inflection when they modify a plural noun. So again, now obviously as a native speaker, I intuitively speak. I intuitively have this grammar system in my head, and often I speak correctly. Although if you've watched my videos, you know I often stumble over my words. That's Chomsky's competence versus performance aspect. As a native speaker, I have competence in my head, but I get all mucked up during the actual performance of speech. Sorry, that's another digression. Anyways, the point being, this is one example of the singular plural subject-verb agreement, where I've read through these lists of troublesome cases twice. I guess this is my 3rd time doing it now. And just, yeah, I can read through them, I can understand them, but I don't actively carry that around in my active memory. I could never, if a student were to ask me in class why a number of has the plural, and the number of has the singular, I could never remember that I had read that rule in the grammar book years ago. And that's the same with everything in this book, at least so I find. I don't know, maybe your memory for grammar rules is better than mine. But, I just found for so much of this book, even after having read the first half of it twice, it just didn't stick in my mind. Now, I did actually, part of the problem is perhaps that I'm just passively reading. I mean, I am trying to pay attention. I am trying to go back and reread it when I don't understand something. I am trying to be an active reader as much as possible, but I'm not studying it like you would study for a test, right? I'm not sitting there with my flashcards trying to memorize these from the test. I'm just memorizing them and moving on. So as I was reading this book, something I thought maybe could help me move this into my long-term memory is if I was utilizing the information more. And that was the origin for, let me go back to my computer here, these series of videos I did here on grammar, where I made a bunch of YouTube videos. These are all screencast videos, in which I tried to explain various grammar points. And these videos, at least most of them, were heavily based off this book and what other resources I could find. But this book was kind of like my first port of call for these videos. I first read everything that was in the grammar book when making these videos, and then supplemented that with whatever else I could find from the other grammar reference books on my shelf, and the internet, and etc. But I've got to say, the stuff in these videos is not in my active memory either. So all the rules about, for example, gerunds or phrasal verbs, when I have to teach this grammar point again for a class, I go back and I look at these old screencasts I made or these old PowerPoints I made, and I have to kind of depressingly realize how much of it I've forgotten since I've made these videos. So I was hoping that the act of creating stuff with this grammar would just permanently get into my long-term memory. But alas, I read and I forget. And I read more and I forget more. And the more I read, the more I forget. And I would love to just have all this grammatical knowledge in my head, in my active memory, for immediate recall whenever a student had a question about it. But alas, I just can't remember it. Now, one of the good things about this book or one of the good things, I'm going to go ahead and say it's a good thing, is there are consolidation exercises at the end of each chapter. And you can check your answers in the back. And they use, you can see these here. These are sentence trees. I believe these sentence trees, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe these sentence trees are only used in linguistics department in North America. I don't think the British ever got into this, at least so I'm led to believe by people like Scott Thornberry, who identified these as an American thing. And these sentence trees are heavily associated with the Chomskyan branch of generative grammar. I'm not sure if Chomsky invented these or not, or if he just adapted them. But you read any Chomskyan grammar and you'll see these sentence trees all over the place. Which, again, is why when I was trying to make sense of Chomskyan grammar, and I noticed that this book was using the same style of sentence trees, I thought, okay, well, this will be a nice supplement to it. Now, somewhere in this book, I forget where, somewhere at the beginning, the authors say that the sentence trees they use are not actually the same ones as the Chomskyan generative grammar. They're a slightly adapted version of it. But having tried to struggle my way through some Chomskyan sentence trees, I can't notice any difference. It seems like this is the same style to me. Maybe whatever changes there are must be minor. So this is a good visual representation of the grammar. It's a good way to get your head around some of the grammar structures by drawing the grammar structure. And again, the exercises will be here, or actually not here, but no, that's a teaching suggestion. All right, exercises. Yeah. Provide your own sentence. No, that's not it. Okay. Some of the exercises at the back of each chapter will instruct the reader to draw the sentence trees. And then you go to the back and you check your answers. And I found that really useful practice and somewhat, dare I say, somewhat fun making these sentence trees. Although the problem I invariably had when I'm making these sentence trees is I run out of paper. So, you take a blank piece of paper, okay, subject, predicate, map it all out here. But by the time I get down here, I'm off my white paper, and then I've got to, cram this part in. So spacing this out all nicely on the paper was always a challenge. But I for the most part, I enjoyed mapping these out, checking my answers. The problem was, though, when I had weeks that I would get a little bit busy, and I have those weeks. My life is a lot busier now than it was when I was 25. I'm busier at work. I'm busier with family and kids and stuff like that. When I would have weeks where I was busy and I wouldn't get a chance to read any of the book. What I normally try and do, even when I'm really busy, is just read a couple pages of the book I'm working on every day. And that's the way I keep these books from moving into my abandoned reading list section and still in my active reading list section. And I usually find that no matter how busy I am, I can read a couple pages before bed. And if I don't have time to read a couple pages before bed one night, then I probably have time to read a couple pages before bed the next night. I can at least make some progress on this during the week. But when I got to the exercises section and I had to do these sentence trees, and it was late at night and I was tired, I didn't really have the energy to do it, and I would put it off. And I think that's one of the main reasons I never finished this book, is because yeah, I guess maybe part of it is my own fault. I could have just skipped the consolidation exercises in the back. But I've got a certain personality. I can never skip the exercises. The feeling of incompleteness would nag at me the rest of my life. I had to do the exercises. And if I didn't feel like I had time to just sit down, I mean, that's the other thing as well, is this requires sitting down at a table with pen and paper and mapping these out and checking your answers, which requires, like setting aside a good 20, 30 minutes to work on it. Whereas a lot of the reading I get done nowadays is just, 15 minutes of my lunch break at work, where I read a few pages while I'm standing in line at the canteen, or read a couple pages while I'm holding a sandwich in one hand and reading with the other. And that kind of lifestyle doesn't lend itself to this kind of serious study of grammar trees. That being said, though, I did get through the first 300 pages, and if you were watching my weekly reading vlogs at the time, and I'll link to all of that stuff in the description down below, I would often hold up these sentence trees I had done on paper, and I would hold up the paper to show on the weekly reading vlogs. I don't have any of those now. I haven't kept them, but I did make a try of doing it. So there's the consolidation exercises in the back. There's also teaching suggestions for each of the grammar points. And this is a grammar book for teachers. Now, these teaching suggestions, I found lacking. I would read them, I would go through and I would read them, and I'm like, okay, my students are never going to do that. My students are never going to do that. My students are never going to do that. I read through all these teaching suggestions, and I think, I can't use any of these. But I think, at least, I don't know. If you've read this book, let me know what you thought of the teaching suggestions. I kind of thought, if I was going to be critical, I would say that the authors of this book maybe have been out of the classroom for a little bit too long, and have lost touch with what students are actually motivated to do. But if I was going to be less critical, if I was going to be a little bit more generous, I would maybe remind myself that the context I'm currently teaching in is not every context. So I'm teaching teenagers who are have varying levels of motivation and are easily distracted and need something very highly engaging to get their attention. So some of these exercises which focus on form or meaning but are not terribly engaging work less well in my classroom, but could easily work well with a group of highly motivated adults. And perhaps, this was published back in 1999. Perhaps the attention span of students has gone down over the years. Smartphones in the classrooms and everyone's brains getting wrecked by TikTok and stuff like that. Perhaps these exercises worked better 25 years ago than they do now. I didn't find them very useful, but could have been a different time, a different place. Maybe they worked better. Teaching a group of highly motivated adults in America before the invention of smartphones, maybe that would have worked better. And I think that's really everything I have to say about this. Again, without getting into a chapter-by-chapter analysis of the different grammar points, which I don't think I remember these chapters well enough to do anyways. But I did actually do a lot of that in my weekly reading vlogs for this book from a couple years ago. And I'll link to all of those in the description down below. And I do, in those weekly reading vlogs, actually get into the interesting things in every chapter, or my thoughts on every chapter in those weekly reading vlogs. So I'll link to all that down below. Of course, that's only for the first 300 pages or so. That's as far as I got in this book. The total book is 800 and some pages. Of course, that's including the appendices. Yeah, it's you're getting your money's worth for this book. But yeah, I'll finish off here.